The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. See, the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many other traditions, such as washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" Jesus replied, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human precepts." Again, Jesus called the crowd and to him and said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them. For it is written within, out of a person's heart, evil comes out. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So there's this word that's been showing up in our scriptures a lot over the past few weeks, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time with it this week in particular. Hypocrisy comes from a Greek word, hypokratos, to be underneath, to be under a mask. It's the word that was referred to actors, people who are acting in a false way, or as a character projected in a false way. And so we have this story this week. We're coming back to the Gospel of Mark after being away from it for about 6 weeks. And if you remember back 7 weeks ago, the last time we encountered Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, he had fed the multitudes on the hillside, and then he had come to the disciples on the water, much to their amazement, to the point where they said, "My Lord and my God." And they knew that there was something spectacular and new being revealed through Jesus. And so here's Jesus up in the Galilee region, up in the northern section of Israel, and he's preaching and teaching, and he's drawing attention to himself. The crowds are growing. People are joining him in the wilderness even, seeking from him the life that is within his words, the Holy Spirit's presence that come to them by being included in the kingdom that Jesus is preaching. And so Jesus is gaining enough attention that even the leaders from Jerusalem, the teachers of the law, the members of the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, those elders who were in each of the villages as teachers of the law, started to move around with Jesus, to keep an eye on him, to listen to him. And so today we have this story where the Pharisees are with Jesus as he's preaching in the Sea of Galilee, and they see that his disciples eat without washing their hands. And immediately the Pharisees call them out on it. They say, "Jesus, Why are your disciples not observing the tradition of our elders that calls us to wash our hands? See, the Pharisees saw themselves as the keeper of the great tradition. It had started with those 10 revealed laws to Moses on Mount Sinai, hundreds of years earlier, 1,000 years earlier. And over the years, the Pharisees, in helping the people live out that great tradition, had added law after law of how to live well in this world, to the point where at Jesus' time, there were 613 laws in the great tradition. And the Pharisees tried to observe them all religiously, to bind themselves together, to bind themselves to the great tradition. And part of that law, as it had been revealed to them and lived out, so they wanted to make sure that the Israelites were a community of priests, offering thanksgiving to God, mediating God's presence to the world. That's what a priest does. And so one of the ways that they called the people to do that was to stay pure in the law. And in the law, they were required to wash their hands with living water, meaning flowing water. That's why when they built their mitzvah, their baths, their ritual baths, it had to have water flowing through it, so that when they entered into it, the impurities, their sinfulness, their brokenness was carried away, washed away. That's the origin of our baptism, is the idea that we're purified in this living water of God. But what they see this day as they're observing Jesus' disciples is that they don't wash their hands in living water. And they call them out. And Jesus becomes indignant. Jesus becomes angry with the Pharisees. Not because they're trying to maintain the law, but because of their hypocrisy. Because they use the great tradition to judge other people. They use their laws to call out other people's insufficiencies, their weaknesses, their inabilities to be perfect as they expect the people to be perfect. But as we heard in James today, those same Pharisees, looking at themselves in the mirror, studying the law, were all too quick to let go of those same brokennesses, those same weaknesses, those same inefficiencies in themselves. And they used them as labels to talk about who's in and who's out, who's acceptable to God, who's unacceptable, who's worthy and who's unworthy. It created division among the people, and that is contrary to the purpose of religion. Religion, the word religio, means to bind together. And Jesus says to the Pharisees, you are not holding people together with your law. You're using your law to divide us. That has no love in it. There's no compassion in that. See, what Jesus was pointing out to them is the fact that his followers, those people in the Galilee region, were unable to live the law the way the Pharisees in their elevated, privileged lives were able to do. See, these were the working class people. They were the fishermen. They were the ones who tilled the soil. They were the ones who sewed the clothes. They were the ones who made pots and carpentry. They were the stonemasons. These were the people who were eking out their lives day after day, just trying to feed their families. And the people in Jerusalem, the big urban center of Jerusalem, looked upon the people in Galilee as, oh, they're good for the tax base, but they're really just a bunch of uneducated peasants. They're not really leading the country. They're not really important to the future of the nation. And so the Pharisees and the leaders would often judge the people of Galilee as lesser than. They looked down on them, and Jesus resented them for it because they would look upon his own followers with disdain. They were hypocrites. And Jesus points this out to them in saying, my followers don't have access to this living water. They're out in the middle of a lake most of the day. They're out in the middle of a field half the day. They don't have this luxury of taking a break in the afternoon to wash their hands before they eat. They are doing the best they can to live the little tradition. They love God. They pay their tithes. They take care of their families. They take care of the widows and orphans. They don't wash their hands? Really? That's what you're going to judge them on? You hypocrites. You know, I can't miss this opportunity or skip over this opportunity to talk a little bit about John McCain. A man who I think struggled in our country with this exact same situation, where he tried to be a leader in a nation and uphold the integrity of his character as people tear down and tear apart and struggle to stay together. He tried to maintain dignity, and he tried to represent all peoples. Now, I'm not painting him as perfect, and it's not political. But what I think John McCain tried to speak out against was hypocrisy. The lack of humility that many leaders show in our nation. He saw it. It pained him. And he loved this country through and through. He suffered for it, for us. And he tried to maintain a level of dignity that elevated us, that brought us together, even in the midst of his disagreements. He always dignified the other person and honored them. We should have that opportunity in our own lives. Because what John McCain reminds us is the same thing that Jesus reminds us, is that people are watching us all the time. Our children are watching us all the time. Our grandchildren are listening to us all the time, and they are learning from us. What are they learning? Are they learning dignity? Are they learning integrity? That what we say and what we do matches our hearts, matches our interior posture before our God, matches our love and compassion for people in the world? Do they see that integrity in us? You know, there's nothing wrong with having dirty hands, especially when they're dirty from serving other people. Jesus never faulted somebody for living their life in a way that they understood God's will to be lived out for them. He never faulted people for not being holy enough, for not following the law closely enough, because, see, the law will only bring us so far. The law has to be lived in love and compassion and forgiveness, or it is not God's law. Let us take some time today to reflect on who's watching us. What are we teaching by what we say and do? And is there a place in our life where we can place a law before God's love and compassion to be more integrated, to be more religious, to be more alive?